topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yakzan. I'm a diversity educator and a core alignment coach, which means I support organizations and individuals in trainings that help them align their actions with their values so that we act more inclusively and create patterns that make spaces for everyone to belong. If you're interested in looking at samples of my trainings, you can go to my website, which can be found at could you believe I'm blanking out the name of my own website? knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. And I am so excited about our guest today, Dr. Kwabena Asante. And I would like to read a description of our sponsors of this program today. This is one of a part of 10 podcast programs that are sponsored by the Creative California Grant. So this program is brought to you by the City of Davis Arts and Cultural Affairs Program and the California Creative Corps, a pilot program funded by the City of Sacramento's Office of Arts and Culture and the California Arts Council, a state agency, as an engagement campaign designed to increase public awareness about issues of social justice, climate resiliency, and more. The Creative Corps program, backed by Governor Gavin Newsom and the state legislature, looks to increase public awareness on topics such as health and safety, water and energy conservation, climate mitigation, emergency preparedness, social justice, and civic and community engagement. Thank you very much for the sponsorship. I see a lot of good coming from this grant. So now I'd like to, Dr. Kwabena Asante, please join me on screen. And I'm going to read some of your background work, which is just phenomenal, and then hear about what you are currently doing. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, good to be here. Always a pleasure to be back here.
Thank you. And actually, Dr. Kwabena Asante was my very first guest when we originally started this show. And it's titled Climate Justice, Just, Equitable, Diverse, and Inclusive, the JEDI acronym. And on this episode, we will discuss climate justice within the context of a broader environmental justice movement. We will discuss the origins of the movement and why climate justice has emerged as an important focus area. Dr. Asante will discuss his personal journey and experiences in the field, including the use of serious games as an education and outreach tool. We will also discuss what role each of us can contribute towards achieving climate justice. Dr. Asante is an engineering scientist with extensive experience coordinating and conducting water and climate resilience studies, planning, and building data services applications. He conducted research at federal and academic research centers early in his career. In the private sector, he supports state and local agencies in multi-year planning programs, project development, and grant writing. He serves as a practice leader by presenting at industry events, co-authoring journal articles, and thought leadership pieces and civic engagements, including serving on a federal science advisory board. I'm not sure how one person does all of those things.
Yeah, but I've been lucky to have all these opportunities. Obviously, not all at the same time, but it's really enriching when you work in a field, an evolving field like the climate world. Just lots to learn every day, lots of new things to do every day. So,
And how long have you been in the climate resiliency world?
well, so I encountered climate change as a field of study when I was working on my doctoral program. Um, I was co-supervised by two professors, one of whom had a really strong interest in building climate models, building tools to enhance climate models. And so he introduced me to that work. Initially, I was just focused on international development and water resources within that arena. But Dr. Famiglietti really encouraged me to look at the climate science, which was evolving at that time, kind of a new field, and to get more actively engaged. So I would say probably beginning in the late 90s. Through the present. I've had different levels of engagement at different times. The early part of my career was a little bit less engaged in climate resilience planning, but certainly the past 15 to 20 years has been quite heavily focused on this area of work.
And you worked in different regions, building, I think, not only models, but actual like infrastructure. Am I right, to help alleviate or climate destruction? And can you share a little bit like where you have worked, because you've seen so many different regions of the world and have applied your knowledge to different areas?
Yeah, so early in my career, most of my work was focused on Africa, and to a certain extent, other parts of the world, Central America, to a certain, and Southeast Asia as well. Just kind of smaller projects, but most of my work really was focused on Africa. I spent 2 years in Mozambique, serving as a kind of the regional USGS regional hydrologist, so working with 10 to 12 countries, supporting different aspects of kind of climate planning and climate addressing climate hazards. And then in the latter part of, I would say, probably the last 15 years has been heavily focused on California. And in fact, a lot of the infrastructure planning that I've had an opportunity to be a part of has all been in California. And we've done some early planning work in that time in Ghana. But those projects did not move on to implementation. So very heavily focused in California. But then through my work on the NOAA Science Advisory Board, the Climate Working Group, I'm able to give input on some of the evolving work in the climate arena across different parts of the U.S. Because NOAA and most people know more as the National Weather Service is probably the better known part of NOAA. But there are other components of NOAA focusing on the oceans, on the atmosphere, and obviously on other portions of the land surface. And so I get through that involvement, I get a little bit of national exposure, to national issues and work and research work and applications that is going on all around the country.
Well, I imagine you're a great asset in whenever you contribute to any stage, but like the planning and when people consult you, because just the global perspective of working in so many on different continents and in so many regions and so many uh, landscapes and climates, it just feels invaluable to me that we're lucky to have you in California.
Well, and California is a great place to learn to work on climate issues. I mean, we've got a climate that fluctuates a lot between the extremes: extreme drought, extreme floods, extreme heat, and even in places extreme cold in the the Sierra Mountains, Sierra Nevada mountains. And so it really is a great place to learn about climate. And obviously, we've done very well in some aspects. We've been able to grow a lot of food in the desert. It comes at an environmental cost, which I'm sure we'll discuss some of those elements. But overall, I think we've done really well as a state in being at the forefront, recognizing some of these climate challenges, and being at the forefront of addressing it. And so it definitely has helped me a lot to be able to learn in this environment.
That's great. So it's true, California is in the forefront. That's not just a myth.
Well,
from what you can see.
So absolutely. I mean, to me, I think one of our signature climate resilience laws that we've passed is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. You know, I talked about how we've done well on the agriculture front and through management of water resources. But in 2015, the state passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which requires water agencies to demonstrate that they can maintain water levels in the groundwater aquifers. Basically, we were pulling so much water out of the ground that our aquifers were declining, with adverse effects on water quality, on streams. Even the land surface was declining. And any infrastructure that was built on it, pipelines, roads, started to decline, to crumble, and in some cases just could not carry the same capacity of water or other infrastructure that they were supposed to carry. And so the state took a very progressive stance, which I believe is probably the first of its kind law in the U.S. and is viewed around the world as exemplary, to ensure that future generations would have access to water and that would protect our environment. To me, this is a prime example of how we're taking progressive steps, and in other areas as well, in the types of technologies that we are employing. A lot of other people look to us and look to what we've done as examples of the ways in which you can address these climate challenges.
Is there a lot of interagency coordination from where you work?
Well, so as a consultant, I only see some of that coordination. But in some of the planning processes that I've been involved in, for example, the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, which essentially the Central Valley goes all the way from Mount Shasta in the north all the way down to the Tulare Basin, and is the flatter portion. And we all in Sacramento or Davis live within the Central Valley. And because it sits at the bottom of the mountains, essentially the flood risk in that region is very high. The melting snow can flood our region, and so the state has organized this plan, which brings together lots of different state and federal agencies, um, and local agencies as well, to um, to think through the problem, to identify what some of those adverse impacts could be, and how the situation gets and worsens and with climate change, and then to identify the types of infrastructure that could help mitigate the flood risks. And so, yeah, I think there's lots of examples of broad collaboration on climate issues within the state.
And I know there's major point of including the voices of tribal nations and tribal authority of how to distribute water and take care of water in the planning and thinking, and hopefully more and more of that as well.
And so, and here I reflect my my dear friend Connor will tell me that this Connor McGee tells me of the struggles that his tribal nation has had in accessing their water rights, the water rights that were guaranteed to them under law, but the agencies essentially did not behave, did not respect those guarantees, and so they had to go through an extended legal battle to secure those water rights. And so in some planning processes, I think overall the state is doing better. For example, when we do the climate assessment, the state's climate assessment, climate issues, the tribal nations have a component. So they have working groups that work together to identify the issues that impact them. But in terms of securing justice for them, ensuring that they are respected under the law, I think in certain instances they still feel that they're what's due them essentially has not been respected, and it comes just from a long legacy of development of other agencies, perhaps positioning themselves and I would say grabbing more of those resources at the times when the tribal nations perhaps were not using the resources or were preserving them for future use.
More work to be done in that area.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, I'm curious about so many of the things that you do. I know I really want to get to the games, but I just feel like it's so educational to get more background of environmental costs and the crossroads between environmental racism and environmental justice. If there's just more to say about how they're interconnected and how in improving environmental justice is improving the climate.
Yeah. So broadly, the environmental justice movement started from a recognition that this certain communities were not getting their due, were being treated essentially unfairly in environmental issues. And I would say the work of Robert Bullard, who is a professor at Texas State University, in the 1990s, I believe it was, in Houston, he was asked to examine a situation in which a waste management plant was being planned near a Black community. And as he began to do his work, do his research, he discovered that not just that single plant, but pretty much every waste management plant in Houston was placed in Black communities. In that instance, it was a 80% Black community, but pretty much every single plant was being
Systemic.
placed in Black communities. So essentially, people of color were being exposed to all of these adverse effects, terrible smells, the chemical leaches that come out of these of these waste management sites. And as he continued to do his work, he discovered that this was actually a widespread practice across much of the southern U.S. And we found out it spread across other industries as well, whether it be petrochemical plants that are placed in Black neighborhoods, or in some instances communities that have moved out into neighborhoods, into regions that are less desirable, into flood zones, are moved out of beaches, places with beautiful scenery, and essentially getting pushed out into these areas. And so the idea was that, and what was somewhat discouraging was that when he tried to speak about it, the environmental groups, traditional environmental groups, did not see this as an issue and would not step out to help. So environmental justice movement essentially emerged to help to address these ills, to help to find opportunities, to ensure that these communities were not being stuck with a bad deal on the environment, that they could enjoy as good an environment as anybody else. And the climate justice movement has kind of evolved from that. Again, a recognition that broadly climate issues, when it comes to climate issues, that those that are going to suffer the worst impacts of climate are not those that created the problem. Disadvantaged communities, the poor, are not contributing that much to emissions. And yet, because they are stuck in their floodplains, because they are stuck in the worst parts of town, because they do not have resources to adapt to these changes, that they feel the most adverse impacts of climate, of a changing climate. And so, yes, our history of racism, our history of redlining, our history of pushing communities into undesirable locations, eventually hurts us and essentially puts us in a situation where we are being unjust, not just in the short term, but in the long term. And so environmental justice is needed. It has to be a conscious thought, a conscious process that helps to establish that.
Wow. We will continue this after a 4.5-minute break with a song by the group called Emma's Revolution. Thank you,
Sure.
Mr.
Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna keep on moving proudly. Keep on moving proudly. Keep on moving proudly. Never turning back. Never turning back. Can you keep on singing loudly? Keep on singing loudly. Keep on singing loudly. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna keep on loving boldly. Keep on loving boldly. Keep on loving boldly. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna reach across our borders. Reach across our borders. Reach across our borders. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna end the occupation. End the occupation. End the occupation. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna stop this war together. Stop this war together. Stop this war together. Never turning back. Never turning back. Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back. 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 Never turning back.
That was Emma's Revolution and their song Keep On Moving Forward. Wonderful duo. I want to thank them and also thank our ASL interpreter, Kenneth Arnold. And for anyone who's listening to this as a podcast later, if you know anyone who would like to see ASL interpretation, you can find this on YouTube archives for one places at the Talk4 TV channel. And it's such an important service. Really appreciate Kenneth being here and City of Davis sponsoring that. So back to Dr. Kwabena Asante. I want to, this is a big question. You're only one person. I know you can't give the whole picture, but just from a snapshot, how would you say we're doing on the conscious planning? Like you were making the point before our break that it takes conscious, conscientious, serious planning to try to decrease inequities and resolve the just bring environmental justice into more and more planning and implementation in reality. How would you say California is doing on that? Does it depend on the area or the project, or can you give us a snapshot and any advice?
So to to set the context, I'd broaden your question a little bit outside of California, and I'll come back to California if I forget. Remind me to come back to it. But it's been ups and downs. There are points at which we've made significant progress, and points at which what it feels like we are moving backwards. So 2002 was the first time at the Earth Summit in Johannesburg, was the first time that climate justice was acknowledged explicitly as part of the global climate negotiations. And a whole kind of set of rules, over 20 rules, I believe, or something like 27 different rules, guidelines were laid out as to how climate justice was to be included in thinking about climate, in how the negotiations were to be conducted. And so it felt like that acknowledgement was important, and it felt like it was the start of a movement. But it took a while for that movement to take hold. So, for example, for me, the next big formative kind of test of climate justice was Hurricane Katrina. I should have mentioned I was in Johannesburg for that Earth Summit, and soon after came back here, and I was in New Orleans, actually in Baton Rouge, is where my wife lived at the time. When Katrina happened, and we were married in Baton Rouge a week before Katrina in 2005, and then to see a week later the scale of the climate damage that Hurricane Katrina wrought, but then to see the disappointing response of the U.S. government, in essence, of state and local response was hugely inadequate and hugely disparate. So that it felt like some of the richer neighborhoods were receiving protection, were receiving help, while the largely Black neighborhoods, which were flooded, it seemed like the response was sorely lacking. And for me, it was personal, well, because I was in the neighborhood. I worked in some of the shelters after the event, but it also came to hit me when I went back to talk to my international partners about collaborating on climate issues, and their response was, hey, go back. The US needs help. You could not respond in a just way when a major event hits you. How are you going to come and help us in Africa? And it was clear that it was a racially unjust response. And so for me, it felt like a huge letdown after all the what seemed like progress in Johannesburg. And it took a long while for within the US, the climate justice movement to form. Environmental justice groups started. Eventually, climate justice groups formed, and there was a Climate Justice Alliance, which has formed in recent times and has been pushing for change. But the climate justice movement is largely in the hands of, I would say, poorly funded nonprofits who are pushing for change, advocating for change, and are not largely supported by the more established traditional environmental groups. And the human rights groups, I would say, have been largely slow to get on board with the climate justice movement. And so I would say overall, there's been movement, there's been progress, but then there's been starts and stops. Now, I would say the Biden administration it really has made a big impact. One of the first things that Joe Biden did when he entered the presidency was to institute what is called the Justice 40 Initiative, which essentially said that 40% of all the federal government's expenditure on climate issues, on clean energy, on sustainable housing, sustainable energy, all of these kind of clean climate-related technologies, 50%, 40% of those resources would go to disadvantaged communities. And gradually over time, they've helped. They've gone through the process of defining metrics to help identify who these disadvantaged communities, and the metrics are broad ranging. And I would say it took a lot. They took a lot of input from work that California itself had done. California has had the EnviroScreen tool for a long time, and the EnviroScreen helps to identify communities' exposure to adverse environmental conditions. It includes things, income and poverty-related indices. It includes access to education, exposure to environmental hazards. So it's a broad kind of large encompassing communities that have kind of large immigrants, that non-speak English-speaking immigrants. All of these different factors are taken into account in identifying the Justice 40 communities. The end positive part of that is that I've been able to work with some communities to secure some of the federal grants, infrastructure grants that have come through this process. So the other infrastructure laws that have been passed under the Biden administration have essentially allowed us to be able to secure grants, infrastructure grants, to help build climate resilience infrastructure in communities. FEMA's building resilient infrastructure grant BRIC program essentially is one of those major tools, major sources that has begun to help move that needle. And so progress is being made. Progress sometimes is fleeting, sometimes we have ups and downs. There's still issues, but we're definitely making progress. We're definitely moving forward. So kind of a nuanced answer there, but overall, I would say yes, progress is being made.
Well, that is really hopeful to hear. That just keeps keeps us wanting to keep moving forward. And I'm really, I really appreciate the depth of your knowledge and taking us back to some key points in recent history. And thank you for sharing that you and your family were personally affected by Katrina. That's a powerful experience to have gone through. And thank you for helping with that also. I'm sure you were part of that cleaning up.
It really was more for my own kind of mental, I guess, benefit, mental health after experiencing that trauma, to be able to live it with others who had, and to be able to process it. So.
I imagine. I mean, I can only imagine that it would take a lot, and what a constructive way to process. So we have only 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure people learn about these environmental based and educational games that you have created. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I've been lucky. I'm not an artist. I'm not. You'll never see a painting on mine hanging on any wall, not even in my own bathroom. But part of my job as a climate scientist, as a climate resilience planner, is to help paint a picture for people, for communities, for decision makers about the kind of world that um, that is coming, that lies ahead if they do nothing.
Mm.
And in many instances, it starts with very small changes that you can relatively, they be inconveniences. You can deal with them and move forward. But if you do nothing, and if you do nothing significant, if you just try to, oh, we'll manage, we'll just squeeze the a little bit more out of our infrastructure, we'll just tighten the screw a little bit. If you do that and never make systemic change, eventually you get to the point where you cannot really operate your system. You cannot survive in the environment. Eventually, the environment will crush you.
Mm.
And that's a sobering message, right? And a difficult message sometimes
Yes.
for people to absorb. And when you've got a really serious message like that, well, what better way to do it than to have people play a game, to experience it through playing a game in which they do want to win, but essentially their lives are not at stake. And so my colleague Rebecca Verity really brought me along on a couple of projects that she's had. Our current game is focused on managing large dams that are subject to a lot of climate hazards, whether it be rainfall extremes, it be um, wildfires in the watershed,
Mm.
the extreme heat that melts off snow or causes large losses of water from the reservoir. And so the dam operator becomes kind of a central figure. Now, if for those in the water resources
Mm.
planning arena, the dam operator is the first villain. If you get flooded, you look up, say, and that guy did not manage his reservoir properly. That's why we got flooded. And so it really, and I'm currently speaking to you from a floodplain management association conference, and we just yesterday conducted a workshop with all sorts of people from all sorts of kind of different aspects of the floodplain management business. We have engineers, we have administrators, we have emergency managers, emergency planners, city officials, state officials. So we have a kind of a diverse group of skill sets of people who approach water resources management and flood management from different angles. And so we had this event in which people got to play the game in different in groups of 5 to 7, and played around the table. Went through and basically the sets of you. So you play through 2 seasons and 2 years, I should say. And within each so you have 4 seasons essentially. The Starting in winter, spring, fall, spring, summer, and fall. And within each of those seasons, different weather events come at you,
Mm.
and you've got to respond and manage your reservoir
Mm.
on the on the things that come at you. And so through this interactive process, they really get to experience what it is like to be in the shoes of that reservoir manager. And you get if they fail, if they overtop the dam and flood the city downstream, They have opportunities to make money and sell the water or sell hydropower. But people who play the game tell us they feel the real stress of being in that position, of being in the position to make those decisions as climate events are coming at them. And so they really leave that game having with a different perception of the problem,
Wow.
of how monumental that the challenge is. And so this is the thing that we try to impose through games like these, to get people to appreciate the sense of urgency, and how little changes can only work for so long. Eventually, if you only make little changes, eventually you're going to fail. So.
How do we get this game? That's is there can you say a website address and let us know the status of, will this become like accessible to?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it's going to become kind of it's going to be commercialized in any sort of way. I mean, it's more of a training tool. And I think we have a number of agencies that have expressed interest in playing the game with their staff, with their with their set of planning communities. So I expect that this is the type of game that will tend to remain within those audiences. It requires quite a bit of playing of training to be able to effectively play it. And so I would say, this is not necessarily your quick off the board game, but if you want to look it up, it's called That Dam Game, and the dam in the middle is a play on words, but it's the reservoir, the dam that holds back water. So
Good name. That's catchy. That DAM game, and I wow, is serious. Wow, that's just like such an effective educational tool.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you
through that game, I become something of an artist, right?
Yes, I definitely was going to say, you may not think of yourself as an artist, but that is a great act of that involves so much creativity, and gosh, it just brings greater brilliance into the world when engineers add their creativity in addition to their engineering abilities and vision and skill. It's like, what a wonderful product. And I'm going to call it a piece of art myself.
Yeah.
Effective,
it's
educational, powerful.
Really has been fun creating it. So.
Well, oh my gosh, we have 2 minutes, so I want to give you a chance to share your closing thought before I say thank you to everyone.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd say climate justice is a real issue, it's a real concern, and I would say in whatever field that you work in, just look out for opportunities, look out for places where disadvantaged communities are being unjustly treated, and step in and do something about it. We can all do it in our different ways. If we had a little bit more time, we can kind of talk about some of the ways in which people do it. But I think that the key message should be that we can do something about it if we all try. So just learn more about climate justice, learn more about environmental justice, look out for it, and do your best to be an agent of change in whatever way you can.
We can all do something if we just try and be the best agent of change that we can by just educating ourselves and looking out for our neighbors, particularly the least advantaged, the most disadvantaged. Gosh, thank you so much, Dr. Kwabena Asante. It's wonderful having you back on the show. And I want to thank our ASL interpreter, Kenneth Arnold. Really appreciate what you bring. And I appreciate our engineer, Rebel. Thank you so much, Rebel. And our producer, Dean K. Piper. And to all the listeners and viewers, be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Talk4 TV or w4cy.com. And may we all have enriching conversations in diversity and environmental resilience this week and ongoing. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the